So first up, I'd like you to, if you can intro yourself, please.
Mm-hmm. So my name is Rachele O'Reilly Niponzio. I was born in Grumento Nova, a little village in the province of Potenza, and I came to Australia in 1957.
So, Rachel, you came to Australia when you were quite young. What are your earliest memories of arriving in Australia? I'm guessing you don't remember the trip, but so what are your earliest memories of Australia?
My earliest memories are the memories that my mum shared with me, because my dad had already come to Australia before us to save up some money, and he'd been here 6 months, sent us some money so we could then board the ship. I believe it was the Sydney that we came on, 40 days, my mum tells me, and it was quite tough on her because I just was hard to keep up with and she was terribly seasick. Then I kind of vaguely remember being around Leichhardt because that was our very first home. My uncle Tony had the deli on Norton Street. It was half deli and half Australian milk bar. And he, had a thriving business, but he worked very hard and very long hours. So we were lucky to have somewhere to live on our arrival. And I was told that we lived upstairs in the restaurant where now Capriccio is. We've had dinner there ourselves as a family.
And did your mum keep any of the Italian traditions alive within your family? Did you grow up understanding that your family had come from Italy?
They were very much into, both mum and dad were very much into not letting us forget that we were Italian. So I was born in Italy. My brother was born in Australia, in Sydney. He's 4 or 5 years younger than me. But I think it was always impressed on us that, we belonged to Australia, but we also belonged to Italy. And it was very important. I mean, at home, we always spoke dialect. I went to school as a 5-year-old with no English. That's certainly changed very quickly, as it does with migrant children, I think. So I went to school at Marrickville West Infant School, and I was the only non-Australian that I can remember, and very quickly picked up English and refused to speak Italian at home. I remember the children in the playground looking at my pierced ears and saying, "Ooh, she's got holes in her ears." They'd never seen pierced ears on a child.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm shocked by that.
Very white Australian
Okay.
at that stage.
So what was it like when you brought friends home, for example?
There wasn't a lot of interaction with the Aussie families around us. Like, I had some good friends, but it was mainly family connections that were fostered. We had an aunt and uncle who lived around the corner, and lots of other aunts and uncles used to congregate at our house for meals, as is the Italian way. Mum was a wonderful cook, not like me. I do things that are quick. But this need to keep the Italian going was very important to them. And of course, as a young child growing up, you resent it. I resented it. Like, I wasn't like the other kids who went to Saturday sport. I had to go to Italian classes at St. Bridget's.
But you can still speak Italian now?
I can, thanks to my parents' insistence. And I then let it go for a little bit, but took it up again in high school, and I did Italian by correspondence for my HSC. But I was the only one in the school, and I had to fight to get that privilege.
Did you do it? Was the language school in Petersham a thing then? Do you know there's like a
TAFE there?
Yeah, and they offer languages by distance.
Yeah, it was languages by distance, but it wasn't over radio or anything like that. They used to send me a printed package every week.
That's handy when you're learning a language.
And Mum and Dad had little, formal education themselves. I really struggled with it, but so glad I persisted.
And do you go back to Italy often? And when you do go back, do you go as a tourist, or do you feel like you're going home?
That's an interesting question, Dani, because We do go back a lot. I'm married to an Australian who would love to be Italian. We still own the house where I was born in a little village called Grumento Nova, and it's tiny, tiny village away from everything, very medieval in lots of ways, but he loves it because it's an escape. It's very beautiful, but not much happening there. There are some significant ruins in the valley, though, because the original Grumentum was attacked and completely demolished by Hannibal, I believe. He went through with his elephants.
Wow, what a story.
So now we have the new Grumento Nova, on the hill.
Oh, okay, so that's where the Nova comes in. And do you still have family that you go home to visit?
Well, apart from the house itself, a lot of the oldies are now passed on. I have some cousins, and we do keep in touch with them. We go back so many times. I think we've been back more times than I can count. The first trip as a couple, when we had our children and they were still young, and that was a very exciting time for us. But apart from COVID, we try and get back once a year if possible.
Wow. And so who lives in the house when
Nobody. Nobody. But we do have one of the locals who looks after our house and just airs it a bit and, checks that there's no pipes that have broken.
Yeah. So how would you feel if your children then decided to go back and live in Italy? Do you think that would ever be a possibility, that they would immigrate to Italy?
I doubt it.
No.
They love to visit. They do love to visit, and they love the fact that they're half Italian. That's very important. But my eldest boy lives in Singapore with his wife, and I can't ever see them living in either Italy or Australia because they have a good career there. They're big travellers, and they love to go back to Italy, but many other places as well. The younger boy, he might. He's the creative one. He often says he's going to go and write his book in Grumento.
That sounds so romantic,
it
doesn't
does.
it? Oh,
it does.
Lovely. So did your... how long were you alone with your mum initially before you came to Australia?
6 months.
6 months. So did your mum ever speak about how she felt during that time with your dad already here?
Desolate. Absolutely desolate, because in those days you lived with your mother-in-law.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
And that could be great, or it could be really not great.
Not so good. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was a very strong woman, and she hated the fact that both her sons had gone to Australia and left them, especially after I was born. They were taking me away. How dare they? And Mum was, to blame. It was her fault. She didn't stop that happening. It was very tough on Mum. And it didn't end there, because when she came to Australia, she had been on a farm all her life. She was the cook, the farmer. She tells stories of on her own family farm. They had lots and lots of workers every day. She'd get up every morning and bake bread and make pasta for 20, 30 people. So then they came here, and she had to leave me with a babysitter, no English, in a big city, go and work, then run a household for my uncle, my dad, and for me, go to the shops where she could find anything that she needed or related to. Veal was unheard of. It was mutton.
So how did they cope with, we take for granted buying the food that we are so used to cooking, and that, especially in Italy, that becomes part of your life. How did they have to adapt diet-wise and just different ways of living being in this new place?
I think they went to the markets a lot. I remember a story. Well, I remember the actual picture. Dad came home with a live chicken. In a sack, a Hessian sack. And we were living at Marrickville at the time, and he let the chicken go, and it was running around the backyard. He grabbed it, chopped its neck off, and off they went. Mum was plucking off the feathers and cooking it that day for Sunday lunch.
Dear.
We had a fantastic backyard because, that was their background. The top part of the yard was about 20 fig trees. Then we had a chicken coop in the corner, and we had along the fence line, it was a big backyard, lots and lots of fresh vegetables, which Dad cultivated. Broad beans and what else, radicchio and all the things that they couldn't buy, that they smuggle the seeds in, tomatoes from Italy, things that they smuggled in. I don't know how they got them here. And, the yearly making of the passata, going to Flemington markets, buying boxes and boxes of tomatoes that were ripe, and then bringing them home, and all the family coming over to bottle the passata, putting it in big drums, lighting a fire underneath and, boiling it. I remember that. And sausage making wasn't as good because Sydney's too hot, too humid. Melbourne's better for that. We had relatives in Melbourne who'd bring it up for us.
So how many of family members of yours did come to Australia? So you've got family in Melbourne, family in Sydney. It sounds like everyone except for your nonna, who was resentful back home in Italy. Most of the people came to Australia, did they?
A lot of them did, because the south of Italy was very hard hit by the war. There was great poverty. The stories of near starvation. They travelled for miles just to find food over the mountains, and there was a subsistence type of living, even though there were only two children in their family, the two boys, and they had their farm. They grew a lot of their crops. During the war was very hard, very hard. So they'd eke away a little bit of extra food, and my grandmother would pack up the donkey and go around to sell extra so that they could put that aside.
Wow, it's I think difficult for any of us to really understand the conditions, not only that they left, but the decisions they had to make to bring a family to a place that I guess your parents would have known nothing about Australia.
No, nothing at all.
Why did they choose Australia?
Because Uncle Vince Pricolo was here. He was the barber. He was the first of our group to come. And he and his brother ran the barber shop on Norton Street for many, many years. Vincenzo and Pasquale Pricolo. And they had a nice little business. They were both my grandmother's brothers. I don't know why they made the decision. I guess it's because they didn't want to be dependent on their parents, and they were always going to be dependent on that my grandparents. They were pretty tough to survive. If Dad wanted cigarettes, he had to go and ask his father for money to buy cigarettes. There was no sharing of income.
Okay, even when he was older,
married. Very tough. That it was all about putting money aside. You're part of the family, so you do as I say. The stories of how to wash your clothes, my gosh. Just down the hill where the fountain is, my mother and all of the local ladies used to go down with a basket on their heads and carry blankets, sheets, everything that needed to be washed down at the fountain, which still flows today, and beat the sheets and blankets and then let them dry there and then carry them back up the hill on their heads.
And that's not that long ago.
No, not that long ago at all. We're talking, in the 50s? There were people, that were washing at the fountain when we've been back. And so we're only talking 10 years ago. I think they've stopped it now. They don't want the detergent in the river.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. And you have managed to keep the essence of Italy alive as well with your husband by running the Norton Italian Festa.
No, that's right.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Patrick, who's he's a very interesting character, but he would rather be Italian than an Aussie. And he takes great delight in telling everybody it takes an Irish Australian to run an Italian festival, because he has made a good job of it. It was in trouble when he took it over about 10 years ago, and he's turned it around and grown it into a great success. And it's loved by the community, very well supported by council, because we couldn't do it without that support, and the local community organisations like COASIT And so it's important to foster Leichhardt as it was, because there have been a lot of changes here. They've now called Leichhardt Little Italy, but I think that's more a reflection of what it used to be than what it is now, because we are a very multicultural population now. A lot of young families have moved in, all the schools are overflowing. And I'm just looking at our neighbours, and so many young families are around us now with young children and puppy dogs, and very different to what it used to be. The Italians have kind of moved on, or kept the shops and houses and rented them out. If they've gone to ritzier places or gone semi-rural in some instances, out, to Fairfield and Bosley Park, and where they have little farmlets or bigger acreage.
But do you think it still, to me, feels like the spirit of Italy still lives on in Norton Street?
Absolutely it does. This is the original Little Italy. It always will be. And I think that it's reinventing itself. It will certainly come back to that Italian essence that belongs here, because it all started here. The festa itself was actually started by the Capuchin monks, priests at St. Fiacre's Church. And it was a religious festival, just how they run the religious festivals in Italy. And then there was a distancing between the church and the festival. It was run by many other groups and organisations, but it's not an easy festival to run, because there are a lot of things you need to achieve. You need to keep the local businesses happy, the local residents happy, your sponsors happy. And to do all of that takes a lot of work.